Words of Sri Aurobindo. From the collective works of Sri Aurobindo, Letters on Yoga, Part 1, Section 2, The Concentric System, Outer to Inner, Chapter 1, The Outer Being and the Inner Being. First subtopic, The Outer and the Inner Being and Consciousness, page 89. Sri Aurobindo says, there are always two different consciousnesses in the human being, one outward in which he ordinarily lives, the other inward and concealed of which he knows nothing. When one does sadhana, the inner consciousness begins to open and one is able to go inside and have all kinds of experiences there. As the sadhana progresses, one begins to live more and more in this inner being and the outer becomes more and more superficial. At first, the inner consciousness seemed to be the dream and the outer the waking reality. Afterwards, the inner consciousness becomes the reality and the outer is felt by many as a dream or delusion or else as something superficial and external. Sri Aurobindo says, the inner consciousness begins to be a place of deep peace, light, happiness, love, closeness to the divine or the presence of the divine, the mother. One is then aware of two consciousnesses, this inner one and the outer which has to be changed into its counterpart and instrument that also must become full of peace, light, union with the divine. At present you are moving between the two and in this period all the feelings you have are quite natural. You need not be at all anxious about it, but wait for the full development of the inner consciousness in which you will be able to live. Sri Aurobindo says there is always a double nature in human beings, the inner, psychic and spiritual, which is in touch with the divine, the outer, mental, vital and physical, which has been brought up in the ignorance and it's full of defects, imperfections and impurities. It is for this reason that in sadhana, things cannot be changed in a moment. The inner experience grows and extends and fills more and more of the nature till all is filled, the imperfections remain somewhere. Sri Aurobindo says, it is a usual experience to live within in one consciousness while the external being, that is the mind, life and body, goes on of itself under the impulsion of the cosmic force, doing quietly whatever is necessary to do. This is the part of the yogic consciousness, and to have it means a very real and considerable advance on the path of yoga. Sri Aurobindo says you have been accustomed to feel your outer consciousness as if it were yourself, and so when you are in your inner realization, you feel as if you were not in this old accustomed self. As you grow in the sadhana, says our Lord Sri Aurobindo, as you keep growing in this sadhana, you must learn to live in this inner being and to feel the outer as something a little outside and this inner being as your real self. The inner parts in everybody remains vulgar or become high according as they turn to the outward forces of the ignorance or towards the higher forces from above and the inner impulsion of the psychic. All the forces can play there. It is the outer being that is fixed in a certain character, certain tendencies, certain moments. Sri Aurobindo continues to say the outer consciousness is shut up in the body limitation and in the little bit of the personal mind and sense dependent on the body. It sees only the outward, sees only things. But the inner consciousness can see behind the thing. It is aware of the play of the forces, personal or universal, for it is in conscious touch with the universal action. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, the outer consciousness is that which usually expresses itself in the ordinary life. It is the external, mental, vital, physical. It is not connected very much with the inner being except in a few until one connects them together in the course of the sadhana. The exterior being is the physical which is connected in an ignorant way with the physical universe. It is this physical being which has developed an external mind and vital. The inner mind and vital are, on the contrary, in direct contact with the universal mental and vital and their forces. The inner subtle physical can also be in direct touch with the cosmic forces of the physical universe, but the exterior being is not in direct touch with the universal or the cosmic, only through the outward mind and the senses. So, Sri Aurobindo says here, it is the outer nature that is obscure, and when it is at ease, feels no necessity of remembering the mother. When the difficulty comes, then it feels the necessity and remembers. But the inner being is not like that. Let me repeat this for you. It is the outer nature that is obscure, and when it is at ease, feels there is no necessity of remembering the Divine Mother. When there is a difficulty, or when he comes across a difficulty, or when the difficulty comes, then it feels the necessity and remembers the Divine. But the inner being is not like that. The inner being is not usually unquiet, but it can be quiet or unquiet like the outer. Next subtopic, the inner, the outer and the process of yoga. Sri Aurobindo says, it is only by virtue of the inner consciousness that the outer can awaken to the divine influence at all. It receives the inner urge even when it is not aware whence it comes. They, that is, the inner mind and vital, exercise an influence and send out their powers or suggestions, which the outer sometimes carries out as best it can, sometimes does not follow. How much they work on the outer depends on how far the individual has the inner life. For example, the poet, musician, artist, thinker live much from within, men of genius and those who try to live according to an ideal also. But there are plenty of people who have very little inner life and are governed entirely by the forces of the nature. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, as one gathers experience from life to life, mental or vital, the inner mind and vital also develops accordingly to the use made up of our experiences and the extent to which they are utilized for the growth of the being. Sri Aurobindo says, you are mistaken in thinking that your external being alone is like that. Hardly anybody has the external being of a yogi. It is the inner being that has the yogic turn. The external has to be converted and transformed. If the inner being does not manifest or act, the outer being will never get transformed. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, if the inner being is safe, then there is no longer any struggle or overpowering of the outer being by inertia or depression or other fundamental difficulties. The rest can be done progressively and quietly, including the coming down of the force. The outer being becomes merely a machinery or an instrument to be set right. It is not easy to be entirely mukta in the inner being. Sri Aurobindo says, when the inner being once thoroughly establishes its separativeness, even oceans of inertia cannot prevent it from keeping it. Sri Aurobindo says it is the first thing to be done in order to have a secure basis in the yoga to establish thoroughly this separateness. It comes most usually when the piece is thoroughly fixed in all inner parts, that the separateness also becomes fixed and permanent. These are the words of our Lord Sri Aurobindo.